Ukraine hunts and erase Russians in Lyman. It is January 20, 2026, and we are seeing something truly unprecedented on the Eastern Front. And look, we aren't just talking about a skirmish here. We're talking about the systematic erasure of a Russian regiment in the forests of Lyman. Advanced drone units are literally hunting infantry with tech that makes jamming useless, while the Kremlin is spinning a parallel reality to hide a disaster that could rival the collapses of 2022. If you support Ukraine and you want the truth, the real story about what's happening on the ground, I have one request before we start. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Arya in the latest podcast by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today, we're going to cover the breaking situation in Lyman, a net school blast. We have a stack of reports on the desk today that frankly paint a terrifying picture of modern warfare. We're looking at a situation where the Russian Third Army Corps has essentially fed an entire regiment, we're talking nearly 2,000 men, into a wood chipper just to straighten the front. But that's not even the wildest part. We're also going to talk about a really bizarre aerial engagement from just a few days ago involving a jet-powered drone carrying air-to-air missiles. I mean, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie. And we absolutely have to discuss why Russian generals are reporting victories in cities that we can prove right now are still flying the Ukrainian flag.
It's a study in cognitive dissonance, really. You have the reality on the ground, which involves, these fiber optic drones and mass casualties, and then you have the reality being broadcast in Moscow, which is, well, it's entirely fabricated. So our mission today is to cut through that fog. We're going to look at combat footage from this week, intelligence reports from the ISW, and the history here to understand why Lyman has become this meat grinder that might just break the entire Russian winter offensive.
Okay, so let's just get right into the thick of it. The headline everywhere this morning is about this erasure of a regiment. We're seeing reports from the Defense Intelligence Directorate, the HUR, about a massive joint operation in the Lyman direction. What exactly happened here? Because erasure, I mean, that's a very specific, very grim word to use.
It is, and it's absolutely used deliberately. To really get this, you have to look at the map. The Russian forces in the Lyman sector were trying to conduct a maneuver to straighten the front line.
Right. A straight line is easier to defend. Military 101.
Exactly. It makes perfect sense on a chalkboard. But in the dense forests around Lyman, trying to maneuver that many men, and we're talking about a full regiment, maybe up to 2,000 personnel, without air superiority or electronic dominance, it's suicide.
And the reports say the Ukrainian response wasn't just defensive. They didn't just hold the line, they counterattacked
Aggressively. The Third Army Corps, working with HUR, launched this coordinated assault that didn't just stop the Russian advance, it completely enveloped it. The report says they neutralized the regiment.
Neutralized.
Which implies a combination of killed, wounded, and Herber, and a significant number of prisoners captured. This wasn't an orderly retreat. It was a total collapse. The Russian maneuverability was just completely restricted by the terrain, and then they were hammered.
Okay, so this brings us to the how, because we've seen these brutal battles in forests for years now. What makes this week, mid-January 2026, so different? I was looking at the footage released on January 17th, and the tech, the equipment, it looked different.
That is the key variable here. The unit spotlight is on the Ukrainian drone unit Signum and the Special Forces Unit Alpha of the SBU. They have deployed fiber optic FPV drones, and they've deployed them in mass quantities.
We've touched on this tech before, but just to remind everyone of the implication, this changes the physics of the battlefield, doesn't
That it completely changes it. Your traditional drones, they rely on radio signals. Russia has spent billions on electronic warfare, or EW, systems that just blast radio noise to jam those signals as their main shield.
Right.
But a fiber optic drone, it unspools this incredibly thin physical wire behind it as it flies. There is no radio signal to jam.
So all those expensive Russian jamming stations are basically just paperweights against these things.
Worse than paperweights, they're targets. And the video clarity is the other huge factor. With radio, as you get lower into the trees or farther away, the feed gets fuzzy, it cuts out. With fiber optics, the operator sees a crystal clear, high-definition image right up until the millisecond of impact. The footage from Lyman, it shows these drones weaving through dense trees, hunting individual infantrymen. It's not suppression fire, it's snaking with high explosives.
That explains that hunt terminology. It must be incredibly demoralizing. You're in a frozen forest, you can't see the enemy, and you know you can't jam the weapon that's coming for you.
It completely strips away any sense of safety. And this technological dominance is why we're seeing such lopsided casualty numbers. But it makes you ask the question, why are the Russians still pushing here? Why feed 2,000 more men into a sector where you know you're being hunted like this?
That was my next question. Is Lyman really that important?
It's the railhead too far concept. We have to remember, the Russian military is structurally, well, it's addicted to railways. They just don't have the palletized logistics or the huge trucking fleets to move millions of artillery shells over long distances by road. They need trains.
And Lyman is the hub.
It's the northern gateway. If Russia controls Lyman, they open up the rail lines to push south towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Those are the real prizes in Donetsk.
Yeah.
As long as Ukraine holds Lyman, they block that entire northern axis. Russia is effectively paralyzed logistically in this sector.
So Ukraine is using Lyman as a bottleneck. They know the Russians have to come this way, so they just set up the kill zone and wait.
Precisely. The 66th Mechanized Brigade, they're known as the Breed Brigade, reported that even before this week's operation, they had neutralized over 2,200 occupiers in this sector over the summer and autumn. They are bleeding the Russian army dry for every single meter of forest.
The numbers are just staggering, and the 66th Brigade mentioned that in some areas, Russia still maintains a six-fold numerical superiority. It just sounds like zombie wave tactics, throwing bodies at the problem until the defenders run out of ammunition.
It's attrition warfare in its most cynical form. But there's a grim detail in the latest reports that shows you just how disposable these troops are to their commanders. Reports are indicating that Russian officers are only allowing evacuation for severe injuries.
Wait, hold on. So if you take shrapnel in the leg or get a concussion, you're just told to walk it off.
You stay and you fight. If you're walking wounded or exhausted or sick, you are not evacuated. You're kept on the line until you either die or the line moves. This is why the capture of prisoners was so high in the recent op. When the line broke, those men had no way to retreat and, frankly, no will to fight to the death.
That paints a picture of absolutely collapsing morale on the front. But, and this is the craziest part of this whole deep dive, if you were watching TV in Moscow, you wouldn't know any of this. You'd think the Russian army was marching to glory.
This is the parallel reality. And it's not just propaganda anymore. It's becoming a strategic liability. On January 16th, the Institute for the Study of War, the ISW, highlighted this massive disconnect. You have the Russian Defense Minister, Andrei Belousov, and General Gerasimov briefing Putin and the public that they have total control of Kupiansk and are seizing railway hubs.
But we have the maps, we have the satellite imagery. They don't control Kupiansk. Not even close.
They absolutely do not. Ukrainian forces are firmly in control of all the key areas. But the lie, you see, has traveled all the way up the chain of command. And it's causing a revolt among the people you'd least expect, the Russian mill bloggers.
These are the pro-war Telegram channels, right? The guys who are usually cheering for the invasion.
Right, and they are furious. They're calling it a parallel reality. One blogger detailed a specific incident that is just, it's tragic in its stupidity. A Russian unit was ordered to rush into Kupiansk-Возlovia. Not to take a tactical position, not to secure a supply line, but to plant a flag and film a video.
So they were sent to die for a TikTok.
Essentially, yes. They were sent to create evidence for the general's lie. And predictably, they were spotted by Ukrainian reconnaissance and just destroyed by artillery before they could even finish filming the staged flag raising.
That's insane. You have soldiers dying to cover up the fact that their general lied to the Minister of Defense.
It creates this feedback loop of failure. If the general says, "We took the town," he can't then request artillery support for that town because officially it's already his. So the troops on the ground get no support, they get slaughtered, and the lie just keeps going. The ISW calls it cognitive warfare, but usually that term means confusing your enemy. Here, they are confusing themselves.
But they're trying to confuse us too, aren't they? The West.
Oh, that's the ultimate goal. They want to project this sense of inevitability. They want decision makers in Washington, Berlin, Paris to look at the map and say, "Oh, look, Russia's taking everything, it's over, let's stop sending aid." It's a narrative war designed to break Western resolve because they know they can't break the Ukrainian military on the actual battlefield.
Speaking of breaking things, I want to pivot to the air war, because while the infantry is fighting in the mud, something very strange happened in the sky on January 15th. We're used to hearing about Shahid drones, the mopeds, right? These slow, loud, propeller-driven suicide drones.
Exactly, usually used against static targets like power plants or apartment buildings.
But the Ukrainian 10/20th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment shot something down that was not a moped, it was a jet.
This is a significant escalation in the tech war. It was a jet-powered Shahed drone. But the twist isn't just the engine, it was what it was carrying. The wreckage showed it was armed with an R-60 air-to-air missile.
Hang on. A suicide drone carrying an air-to-air missile. What's the target profile there? You don't use that to hit a building.
No. This suggests Russia is trying to develop a cheap way to hunt Ukrainian aircraft. They're likely targeting Ukrainian helicopters or maybe even other drones. It just shows that the offense-defense technological cycle is spinning incredibly fast. Right. Russia realizes they are losing the air war, or at least failing to gain superiority, so they're trying to improvise these hunter-killer drones.
It's a frightening kind of ingenuity, but the fact that the 120th Regiment shot it down suggests the defense is keeping up.
It is, but it emphasizes that Ukraine needs the most advanced air defense systems available. You can't shoot down a jet-powered missile drone with a machine gun, not effectively. You need radar-guided systems for that.
It feels like every week there's a new first in this war. First, fiber optics, now jet drones with missiles. But I want to ground us back in the human reality of this because the technology can sometimes obscure the cost. You mentioned Lyman being a northern gateway, but it's a crime scene.
It is. We cannot forget that Lyman was liberated once before, back on October 1st, 2022. I went back and I reviewed the reports from that liberation. When Ukrainian forces entered the city, they found the aftermath of the Russian occupation. One mass grave site alone contained 146 bodies.
And these weren't just soldiers killed in combat, were they?
No. Civilians, families. And that history, it explains the ferocity of the Ukrainian defense today. They know exactly what happens if the line breaks. They know what occupation looks like. It's not just a change of flag, it's a death sentence for the local population.
And just today, January 20th, we had a reminder that justice is catching up, albeit slowly. The SBU announced the capture of a Russian soldier who's suspected of executing 9 Ukrainian prisoners of war in Kursk Oblast back in October 2024.
President Zelensky's comment on that was very sharp. He said, "We will find every Russian murderer." It sends a signal that there's no statute of limitations on these war crimes. Whether you're a general lying in Moscow or a soldier pulling the trigger in a forest, the system is tracking you.
It connects the Frontline meat grinder to this broader terror campaign. And that terror is being felt in Kyiv right now, too. We have reports today that Russia is targeting nuclear power plant substations again.
That's the other side of the coin. If they can't take Lyman, they try to freeze Kyiv. Thousands are without power and water as we're speaking. It is a total war strategy. They're trying to break the will of the civilian population because their army is failing to break the military lines.
So bringing this all together, the destroyed regiment, the fiber optic dominance, the fake victories, the terror strikes, what's the strategic outlook here? It feels like Russia is desperate for a win before spring.
They are. They're pushing for a buffer zone. They desperately want to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk to claim some kind of political victory for Putin. But their strategy is it's flawed. They're relying on mass, just throwing more meat into the grinder. But Ukraine is countering with maneuver and superior technology.
The fiber optic drones versus the human wave.
Exactly. The destruction of that regiment proves that Ukraine can still conduct complex, large-scale counterattacks. They aren't just sitting passively. And economically, the clock is ticking very loudly for Moscow. The ISW noted that Russian oil and gas revenues are expected to drop by 46% this January compared to last year.
That is a massive hit. You can't run a war indefinitely with your revenue cut in half.
No, and their infrastructure is crumbling, inflation is skyrocketing, and they're burning through their old Soviet stockpiles of tanks and artillery. It's a race. Can Russia break the Ukrainian line before their own economy and logistics completely collapse?
And based on what we're seeing in Lyman, the Ukrainian line isn't breaking, it's sharpening.
It is erasing what comes at it.
Here is a thought to leave you with as we wrap up this deep dive. If Russian generals have to lie to their defense minister about taking cities just to keep their jobs, and if Russian soldiers are being hunted by technology they literally cannot defend against, how long can this parallel reality survive? Are we seeing the cracks in the dam that lead to a collapse like we saw back in 2022?
If the regiment in Lyman is any indicator, I'd say the dam is already bursting.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. If you found this analysis valuable, help us keep the lights on and the reports coming. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.